Hey there, I'm Pete Townsend, and this is Money Never Sleeps. We look inside the minds of entrepreneurs and at the crossover of startups, enterprise, finance, technology, and life as we know it. As many of our listeners know, I lead the Techstars Web3 Accelerator, investing in entrepreneurs building in Web3 and enabling the next wave of growth in the decentralized internet and in tokenized economies. Applications are now open for our spring 2025 class, so check out techstars.com/accelerators/web3 to apply. Joining us this week is Garvin Callan, founder of OneZero1, a company that's redefining how startups and enterprise alike can navigate the complex world of digital strategy and transformation. Garvin is a strategist, innovator, and transformation advisor whose career spans leadership roles in major corporations, as well as working hands-on with startups, giving him a unique perspective on both sides of the entrepreneurial divide. He's also a lecturer and the author of Digital Business Strategy, a must-read for anyone serious about innovation and growth in today's fast-moving world. In today's episode, we're going deep on a range of topics, from how Garvin has lived by the words of Barack Obama, as in, we are the change that we seek, to the lessons he's learned from both startups and enterprise, and how those lessons can be applied on either side of the table. Garvin's really got his finger on the pulse of how startup founders think and how corporate executives think, and he also shares some stories on bridging the gap between the two. So whether you're an entrepreneur, a corporate leader, or just someone interested in the future of business, this episode is packed with insights you won't want to miss. All right here on Money Never Sleeps. Garvin, in your book, Digital Business Strategy, and thank you for sending me a copy of that, really appreciate it. You start with a quote from Barack Obama. Change will not come if we wait for some other person or if we wait for some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. Pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Tell me, how have you embodied that quote in your career today?
Yeah. Great to be with you, Pete. And you're welcome on the book, of course. So, I mean, look, it's an interesting time. Maybe Obama, with everything that's going on in the US right now. If I cast forward, I think about my own roots. I was uprooted when I was 12. Uprooted's a bit strong, right? But my folks, we moved from a kind of fairly rural setting to a pretty urban setting and a much more dynamic setting when I was 12. And then we moved again when I was 14. And then we moved again when I was 17. So I had a reasonable amount of time as a kid, but then I kind of started to go through this kind of almost eras where I had to shape shift to the environment from a rural to more progressive kind of urban environments. And then when I went to college, Pete, I went to study engineering and then figured out I didn't like that and dropped out after 2 years, got a job in financial services and pretty much ended up, and I would say partly because of those early, changes that I went through, force changed early, I started to find myself curious and kind of open to always looking at the world and always looking to move, always looking to, I can seek out a little bit of stimulus. And I do put it back to those early couple of years, cursed my parents at the time, as you do when you're a teenager. But now I'm very thankful because I think for me, it opened just an ability to be a bit more resilient and to adapt. And I wish that more organizations, particularly enterprises, were systemically doing that. It's something I do talk about with my enterprise side clients about how they can think about, looking at the talent that they have and preparing that talent to be more adaptable, more mobile, more resilient, more curious, more nimble. I mean, that's all the stuff we read in the books, right? But how to do it, I think actually comes down to doing it. I mean, you go and work for a global, and I work for a number of globals, and they rotate their senior leaders. I mean, you're brought up in EMEA and you can't go to the next level until you've done a tour in the West Coast, or you've been in Singapore for a couple of years until you've come out of the back and been in the front and all the rest. So we do that at an executive level, and we see that at kind of global enterprise level. But, bringing that thinking down, and actually those mechanisms for doing that, I think that's not just desirable. I think it's absolutely critical in the ages that we live in, where, change is the thing that we're all trying to grapple with and wrestle with. So I just thought opening the book with that idea of the necessity for change, because it's changing faster on the outside, Pete, than it is on the inside. The end is nigh. Jack Welch said that 20, 30 years ago. Here's the reality. Change cycles are much shorter. The incline is much steeper, no holding it back. So adaptability and change in many ways is the superpower today. And just thinking and reflecting on that at an individual level, I think is really important. But I also think at a business level, and I talked about large enterprises. I have the pleasure of working with, many founders and scale-ups as well. And by God, it's no different. It's just a different type of change. It's the same, but different. It's a different type of change that's going on.
It is. It's really interesting in that your teenage years are those moving around a lot, and that being the change that you seek, you kind of are Mr. Change.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that I was talking to my sister about this last night, and that she had a period of time back when she was, 22, 23 years old, where she was moving up and down the East Coast of the United States as in semi-pro kayaker.
Wow.
And she had this mindset of, and I don't know whether I said it or she said it, but that being unsettled was settling for her.
Yeah.
But she is living through right now on the beach in Tahoe because she was and her family were evacuated from their whole neighborhood because of the fires going on in Reno, Nevada right now. So I talked to her last night and I'm like, just go with it. You're in a beautiful beach. Yeah. You're in a campground. I referred back to this point in time where she shared this with me about being unsettled and having that be settling. And it must be something that you do yourself by bringing that kind of, okay, we're in this maelstrom of change that we are undertaking or about to undertake, whether it be at the enterprise or startup level, and that your experience with change must be a settling factor in unsettled environments.
Yeah. I've probably found since I left corporate life, so I left 6 years ago, and look, I didn't know what I was going to do. And I think actually stepping out, saying, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I mean, I drew out a kind of a little, really simple 4-box grid. And I said, look, I really enjoy, thinking through and then architecting and actually executing like difficult strategies, and they call that transformation today. That's just because of the scale and all that. But that's what it is, executing strategy. And I said, I want to do more of that in lots of sectors. I wanted to work on some product. I wanted to get balance back in life. That was really important for me at that time. It was probably the lead kind of driver. But after doing that, I said, what am I going to do? So, and then I wanted to do a little bit of giving back. But even stepping out with drawing a degree of comfort that it's okay not to know. And it's okay to be organic. And it's okay to be Darwinian about this thing. And that necessitates you backing yourself. And I remember somebody asking me when I was looking to leave one organization and go to another organization. And they just looked at me and they said, because I was asking all the questions to look for certainty. Right. And they basically said, there is no certainty. In fact, we want you to create the uncertainty, is what they said. So I was moving from one bank to another bank to do in the new bank what I'd done in the old bank. What I'd done in the old bank was necessitated by the financial crisis and necessity and burning platform. And they said, we want you to bring that. And having been through all the uncertainty, I was probably maybe looking for a little bit of certainty. And then they said to me, that's not actually not what we're looking for you to do. And then I reflected and said, actually, I don't thrive in certainty. I probably enjoy the stimulus of uncertainty. And I think that personal reflection piece is really important about, certainty and risk. And then saying it's perfectly cool to say, I either need certainty or I don't need certainty, and understanding why you're in your innate self. And I think that's in many ways a really defining kind of pillar, almost a foundation of the people who do go on and people who, establish businesses, who found and innovate and explore. It's not saying that innovators aren't in businesses, but perhaps they need a certain stable context within which to be flexible and malleable and to allow innate innovative juices to flow. So I think that there's layers to certainty, isn't there, that are around us. There's the personal certainty and there's contextual certainty. And I think the two of those play with each other.
I try to make it all the same. And I think you and I have that advantage, Garvin, in that with the way that we're executing our professional lives and our, when you jump out into the wild, that it's just, it's life. It's how things work. It's how things operate. So,
yeah. I think seeing it and consuming it that way, and then using that as your fuel is critically important. I'm working with and I sit at the board of an asset data management firm, and they're going through an incredible scale up right now. And there was a beautiful little vignette of one of the leaders who was really good operationally. And the organizers said, we actually need business development, somebody to give a go on that. And they looked into the organization, and one lady put her hand up and she said, I don't know how to do this, but you know what? I'm going to give it a go because we need to do it and somebody needs to do it, right? And she went in and she's done it, and she's learned what she can do, and she's learned loads about what she can't do. And she's been putting her hand up and said, I just can't do these pieces. I need help, and so on and so forth. So that kind of, self-reflection, that honesty with self, to be honest with the organization about what you can do, what you can't do, but also, the capacity to jump and say, I'm going to go into the unknown, that leapfrog. I said, what a beautiful thing to watch in an organizational setting, but also what an important thing to acknowledge, that it's only so many that are able to do that. And then, certainly does prevail for many others. And to be the best, I think you have to understand what makes you the best. So they're important points.
Definitely. I wanted to talk about OneZero1 for a minute. When you jumped out into the wild 6 years ago, were there any particular lessons that you learned during your career in industry that you drove into the ethos of OneZero1 to project to potential clients, people that you're working with, whether it be the startup or enterprise level, that you point to as being, this is how you operate, this is how you roll?
Yeah, great question. I think, I talk to, and I frame this, and I have done since the very start, I framed this around because the idea of there's 3 V's that I think are really important in business life more generally, but in business. And I think they've come to me from 26 years pre-OneZero1. And I've been kind of pushing them, and I've been kind of proving them and evolving them, right? So let me give you the 3 V's. It's vision, values, and velocity. So, I framed this around, you remember Hall's iceberg of culture, this idea that, you can see 10% floating across the top, but actually 90% is below the waterline. And that's where all the formulation is. For me, there's kind of 3 parts to the iceberg. There's the vision, which sits above, is kind of the North Star. There's the values that sit underneath the waterline, because how you act is how you think, they're inextricably linked. So curating how organizations think is just, for me, so critical in the achievement of visions. And that's not good enough, because then an organization has to hardwire itself for velocity. I learned a lot by steering transformations, several of them really hard ones through the financial crisis, working for financial institutions, where we basically had to rip it up and start again. We had to deconstruct and ultimately reformulate, re-architect through the financial crisis. I did that at Danske Bank. I led a number of transformations in there. Difficult times for colleagues, difficult times for customers, for the market, for everybody and everything, right? But it was spurned by financial crisis and necessity, which made it really hard. And then I observed, when I moved on from that, and I worked in and learned with other organizations, when it was spurned by either necessity or when it was spurred by outputs. So commercials, profit, everyone got there, but it was harder to get there because it didn't call to the heart, it called to the head. And one of the things I said to myself, because lucky enough, when I was in Bank of Ireland, I had the pleasure of working with many of the innovation team and helped to establish that. And I found that innovation folks, when they came from the outside in, they just thought differently. They didn't start with the end result. They started with the input, not the output. So they started with, when we started working in the startup scene, they had a help first mentality. I was intrigued by that. And then I watched it and I learned from it. And I said, here's folks that lean in and give on the kind of understanding that the world gives back. But what you get back is a direct correlation to what you give. And that kind of started to inverse my thinking around life and business and actually turning up and giving. So my own purpose that I have for OneZero1 is that every conversation, every day, I need to leave it better than I found it. It's just really simple. And I just test myself every day with that, And so that's interesting. So that's an aspiration right now. And I think we all need that calling aspiration. And then I come to values, because that's really interesting. But you've got to be able to think, and you've got to have the psychology to match that. And I go back to this idea of change being just such an important muscle, because one of the characteristics, the values, the kind of the beliefs that I see of not striving, but thriving organizations. And I put it down to some of their values that I observe. And some of the most progressive, the most dynamic, the most rewarding organizations are definitely striving for a purpose, something that's bigger and beyond. But then there are things like I describe constructively dissatisfied. I mean, it goes back to sports. And if you think about golfers, they're just on this perpetual journey with the swing. But actually, if you think about the golfers that get to the best and the top of their game, they really work hard on the technique, because the technique, the brain and the technique, they get them there. So again, culture, right? But they're perpetually dissatisfied with the things in the swing that just aren't right for them and the game they're going to play in the era that they're in, and their mind. So they connect the mind and the body, and they know when it's out of whack, right? So they're perpetually dissatisfied. And you see golfers, like, they just step away and they rebuild their swing, they rework their swing. And they take the time and they take the consequences of cannibalizing what's made them good to be better. So I love that idea of being able to cannibalize. So I think you got to connect things like, I want the world to be a better place, but I've got to be better myself in order to make it a better place. So I've got to perpetually just challenge myself, and so on and so forth. So that's the vision and that's the values. And then the velocity. I mean, when I think about organizations, I mean, they're the big old behemoths. I mean, they're made for safety. They're not made for velocity. They're trains, not supercars. They're steady. And then, if you think about this symbiosis of scale-ups to kind of rejuvenators, these organizations that are trying to change and get faster. I mean, a lot of it does come down to how they set up their structures and their customs on the inside to facilitate velocity. On velocity, I mean, a lot of it starts with actually the practice of strategy itself. So most of the organizations I work with, we set out what the next couple of years looks like and where we want to play, how we want to win, whatever framework we're going to use for strategy. But actually, most importantly, we come together every 3 months and we say, what did we say we'd do the last time we got together? What have we done? What have we learned? How has that gone? Where are we moving forward at pace? Great. How do we do more of that? What's stopping us? Honest conversation. How do we unblock that? Or do we just call it? Because calling things is really important today. And then that's about actively planning our way through strategy success, and that idea of creating that flywheel. So vision, to be really clear about what impact you're going to leave in the world and knowing what benefits you're going to get from it. Working on what kind of psychology attributes, behaviors you'll need to see, the values, in order to enable the organization with some structure to move at velocity. The gaps in those areas. And then from observing organizations, from going on safari and looking and spending time around the world on what was working, led me to that idea of kind of creating that success triangle, 3 V's. And I practice that, books a lot about that. And I look, it won't be everything, but I think if you kind of anchor those things down, you've set yourself up for some stability in a maelstrom. They're the kind of anchor points that allow you to flourish in a world that's just ever changing.
It's interesting though, these 3 V's of vision, values, and velocity, right? And that from the tone and the visions and ideas that are in my head as you're talking through this, I very much imagine that in a corporate setting. Yet, when I ask founders, when I'm interviewing for Techstars, before I'm making investments, doing my due diligence, I ask them about their vision. What does the world look like when what you're building is an absolute necessity? What are your values? How are you going to build this team around those values in a way that everybody can subscribe to that and know how to act, how to carry themselves, how to strive forward when you're not around? Yeah. And then velocity, how do we move faster? How do you do this at pace? And these are all early stage startup disciplines. So you've got your foot on both sides of the divide here between startups and enterprise. What do you think is one thing that you've learned from working with startups that large companies can practically apply?
Yeah.
And are there any success stories that you can point to on
Yeah.
this?
Yeah. Great question. Getting out of your own way.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, and I've observed that with a number of scale up leaders. So they've gone through the founder when they built successful businesses. There's one gentleman in particular I'm working with, he's a phenomenal character. He's the epitome of non-stressful dexterity. And what do I mean by that? I mean, he's acquiring businesses around, he's got VC backing now, right? And he's acquiring businesses around the globe on a quarterly basis. And he's moving around and so on and so on. I bumped into him at the airport. He was just kind of leaning against a post last Thursday. We were both flying in and on the same flight we didn't know. And I kind of seen him and I said, how are you? Go, oh, yeah, I've just been in Madrid. I've just been on the way back from Singapore, London yesterday and so on and so on. How are you feeling? Yeah, I'm good. He's just this demeanor, right? Yeah. How many deals did you do this week? Wow, we got one and we lost two. And he's going like that. So he doesn't impart stress because he doesn't live the stress. Only 9 years ago, he and three were in a basement, a dingy basement in one of those old Georgian houses, right, in Dublin, with the furry wallpaper. And they had an idea and they built software and it's done, incredibly well. And they're across the globe now, all continents, acquiring. And he said very early he had to learn to get out of his own way. He was so ambitious, and he is so ambitious, and he's done tremendous, and he's a tremendous leader. But actually, what makes him a tremendous leader is he doesn't attempt to be what he can't be, what he shouldn't be, and actually he realizes the concept of the pyramid. If you're going to be lucky enough to sit at the apex, and you want to build a thing of grandeur that kind of emerges from the ground, that's only built on every block that sits underneath, and architecting that so that every layer is as sound and stable and safe. And he spends his time on talent. He moves around and he builds talent, and he says, and where he knows he doesn't know things, he says, I just don't know that. So, and I could tell you many stories like that. I can tell you a story of a founder I'm working with right now who's really struggling. He built a fantastic business. There's about 30, 35 people in there. He has the ability, and it's not about people, right? You just take that as a proxy, right? Fantastic business. And it's an opportunity to 5x the damn thing in the next couple of years. But the most difficult thing for him is letting go. And it's the founder's kind of curse, isn't it? Being so deeply entrenched in the business. So a learning for founders is to get out of your own way. But actually a learning for enterprises on the basis that the founders that really break through are the ones that get out of their own way, the ones that build boards and harness partners, and they harness thinking that they just don't have. The curse of the enterprise is the assumed pharaoh, which is I have all the knowledge, I have all the wisdom, I sit on top of the pyramid. I mean, it's a pyramid. Getting out of your own way as an executive. I found I had to do this. I found I brought executives with me, Pete, some of them dragging and screaming and kicking.
That's good to play that role. From a startup perspective, I see that, and that where you've got to rise above the maelstrom, and that you kind of just have to let some of this roll right off of you. But you can only really do that if you've built a great team.
Yeah.
And you have to be so conscious and so focused on that. On the executive side in an enterprise, you can have that discipline and that focus to stay out of your own way. But you may then have a boss at the senior exec level who puts yourself back in your own way, right? Where the political side of this and those that may put themselves before the vision, that are calling the shots, may make it more difficult for you. Have you seen any instances of that?
Oh yeah. I lived it myself. I have a couple of what I call enterprise clients. So multi-regional, global clients that I'm dealing with, where, you got the manager in the middle syndrome playing out like furiously. And it's really difficult. It's one of the most difficult roles is to be a divisional leader in a global, where you're asked to think like a CEO. In reality, your boundaries are much narrower. You're a COO or a CMO or, whatever you are. But I lived that life myself. And I what I learned, and maybe worth imparting, is the idea, and coming from banking, right? Maybe we pick this up, the idea of currency exchange. And when I'm working with clients now, I talk about currencies, both to the market, but with these enterprise clients on the inside. What do I mean by currencies? Like everybody's trading all the time. We're all trading, we're all selling, we're all buying, we trade. And particularly in large enterprises, we trade our way every day to the top or to success or just to completion. Because so much comes down to relationship, doesn't it? But here's the thing, everybody's currency is different. For one leader, the currency, it could be a couple of things, right? It's got obviously operational, delivery, but perhaps for a leader, it might be female leaders, particularly at the moment, are saying, how do we build, a more diverse and inclusive organization, and particularly more senior leaders? One of them, particularly moment I'm working with, is kind of asking that question of the organization, because she has seen how hard it is to get up. It's a tech organization, so it's very hard to get up and get senior in a tech organization. Not impossible; it's getting much better, but it has been difficult. So they're saying, how do I make the path easier for those behind me now that I've had the success of being ahead? So a currency for somebody like that, it could be a man or a woman, it doesn't matter, right? Could be, I want to change the value of this organization as well as delivery. So the boss might be really interested in delivery, but not really have any much interest in diversity, right? But yet there may be other leaders in other parts of the organization that might equally be as actively, advocates of trying to create. So they're kind of currencies. And I think it's really important for the manager in the middle to start understanding influence, interest, and currencies.
That resonates, because when I left the corporate world, one of the last pushes for me to get out was a boss in another country saying to me, Pete, either become a yes man or go find something else to do. And I said, well, I'll find something else to do. So I'm glad it happened, though, because I had that itch for a long time.
Yeah.
But thinking about this term of currency is that there were other people around the organization that would have been much more supportive of me.
Yep.
And that I could have probably engaged with to kind of help position things a bit.
Yeah.
But you know what? My time had come.
Yeah.
I found my way out. I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
But look for other champions and look for other supporters in there. That's a really good point.
And then trade in the currencies people are interested in trading in. I mean, don't turn up with the wrong currency, because you don't get a bet at the table if you turn up with the wrong currency.
Yeah.
I mean, you get turned away. Innovation in organizations, the same large and small. I mean, I've done it, setting up innovation teams out on the fringe where, there's a ball of excitement and energy or imagining the future, and then you turn into the organization and they just look at you and go, what a waste of time and energy, because we can't do any of that.
Totally.
And that's because the currencies aren't connected. So how do you understand your currency of your organization? Go ahead and try and innovate for it, bring it back in, bring the people out and make that connection.
How do you bring this all back to startup founders and those that are going through scale up moments and scale up periods, that with this experience and lessons learned from the enterprise side, how do startup founders apply some of these lessons learned?
Yeah. When you're in the tunnel, you're trying to bore your way out into market success, right? You've got to get your head down, and you kind of get very disciplined down there, don't you? And I see one of the traits of founders is just this zero distraction, laser focus that they get. And sometimes they forget just to, take those blinkers off a little bit when light starts to emerge and when they think they're going to come out of the tunnel. So one of the things that I do, I reverse engineer the safari, right? So the safari came from the idea of, big incumbents need to learn and see things just differently and see how the new world is moving forward and understand what that means, right? And it's about understanding what it means so they can act. Again, I just see this infinity loop, this symbiosis between taking the blinkers off on both sides. So one of the reasons I'm lucky enough, sitting on a couple of boards, working with a couple of scale-ups and founders, is they're being smart. They're trying to future back their business. So they're trying to say, well, we want to be successful like those big scaled up organizations. They're trying to build the structures, the governances, the risk, they're trying to get ahead of putting in place the building blocks for scaling at quite an early stage. So they're taking the blinkers off and they're saying, okay, I'm we're going okay here in the tunnel. I can see a path. When I get out of the tunnel, does it just drop? Is it just sheer drop? into deep blue beyond, or actually what did the tracks look like beyond that? And what I find with founders that I'm working with, and lots of them are saying, okay, we need to establish a board, or risk is not something we ever thought of other than to be exploited, and talent. Back to that piece about talent, I mean, it's always come down to people, and that sounds all wrong, but I'm saying it just to accentuate the point, Pete. How do we build the structures? But really importantly, in the midst of all that, what I try and do for the founders I'm working with is show them where all the pitfalls are going to be, where they're going to get tied up in knots, or where they're going to have gaps, or where they're going to overcompensate. So another organization that I'm working with right now is trying to establish a risk function, because they've had a few little scares and they've kind of said, okay, well, we need to make that a practice now, don't we? So, yeah, we need to make that a practice. And all of a sudden they've kind of flipped over and they've kind of got risk committees and so on and so forth. And we can say, whoa.
Too much, too quick.
Too much. Yeah. Too quick. So the idea of throttling. So looking at the tracks and throttling the carriages so that we keep some, again, it's a symbiosis, but we kind of keep some cohesion on laying down the tracks to allow us to accelerate, to expand our vistas. So, but such that we don't go off the edge too quickly, or that we don't put on too many brakes and too much weight that makes us go slower rather than go faster. So that idea of throttling is what I try to bring. And that applies itself in different ways in every different kind of endeavor that I'm working with.
One of the things that I heard recently, and I forget which podcast that it was on, Garvin, it was this idea of corporate innovation labs. And that I remember from my days in the corporate world, anytime that there was a tech startup coming through Dublin that reached out to me, I would take the meeting. I would take the meeting because I was hoping they would ask me to go work for them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But what they wanted was I was influential in the organization and in a position where I could act as a champion for them, sometimes a false champion.
Yeah.
And if you put that context into an innovation lab, we see this all the time with innovation labs, just startup engagement and trying to bring some of the latest and greatest directions of travel that tech players are going and trying to bring that into larger organizations.
Yeah.
And there's all different types of levels of that. But in this podcast, the idea was that what startup founders should be doing is cozying up to these innovation labs, not just one, but many. Now, what startup founder has the time in the world to do all that? I don't know.
Yeah.
But if you do it carefully and you do it some engagement, the reason that the podcast host was suggesting this was to create some potential exit routes.
Yeah.
So that don't wait until you have 6 months of cash left before you start looking for potential buyers. Build those relationships along the way, especially if you think that your business is something that would eventually sit right within a larger enterprise, rather than growing to scale and going to IPO in 10 years or something like that.
Yeah.
This idea, do you think it holds water? Do you think that is something that startup founders could actually execute?
Yeah, I do, but I really recognize and resonates very well the conundrum of capacity, right? I do, and I have a way of thinking about it, and I had a way of managing it myself, and I do talk to founders about this. And it's this idea of the migration versus the murmuration, right? So bear with me, right? So, the wild geese twice a year, south, north. So that tends to be the enterprise, right? The big, long, slow journey, or the innovation, and the end. And it's usually enterprises through innovation labs looking at founders, right? So that's the context. So big organizations interested, but here's the reality. The cycles of discovery, experimentation, adoption happen really slowly. So it's like time ticks ever so slowly by. Then you got startup out here, and there's like the murmuration of swallows there, and the whole ecosystem itself is just, it's vibrant and it's alive, and it doesn't migrate. And that's why there's a murmuration, because the murmuration is the mechanism for defense and safety and so on and so forth. So I think for the swallow and in the murmuration, that the founder, what they need to do is recognize this tick-tock that happens behind the lab, because the lab can be really interesting, and there'll be, enterprises and investors and so on and so forth. They'll come in and out and at a rhythm, right? And what I find is there's always a journey and there's always a maturity curve. So I've seen it in so many organizations, working with organizations now, bringing them on the maturity curve where they're trying to figure out what is innovation in the first place. And then they're going and looking at the lab and then they're looking to see what it looks like. And then they're saying, let's do some experimentation. And then they're failing and it's really hard. And then they're resetting and they're saying, well, let's build the innovation capability in the inside and let's partner with the lab on the outside. There's a fairly standard kind of build up that happens here.
Oh yeah.
But it takes years, right? So the thing is for the founder is to look in and say, I need to know who's coming through and who's coming through, but realizing that, I got to rate to the right time in the maturity curve for us to have impact. And I think that just takes a little bit of visibility. The other side of things is there's just as much feverish activity going on out here. And even though an enterprise might be ready for you, you may think, but you're not ready out here. So there's a whole synchronization. And I think my view is, and my practice has been kind of on both sides of that, is to think about being efficient and maximizing the perfect synchronizations and not getting sucked in too early or on your side, or not allowing the enterprise to suck you in too early. Because I've seen a fallen foul of this and being guilty of it, where the enterprise, if it's not mature enough, and it takes time, if it's not mature enough, it'll potentially burn.
Yeah.
Not completely, right? But it'll burn time. And that startup doesn't just have that time. So we've got to find that synchronization.
Yeah. I love it. And to me, this is building up relationships, right? And that what are the different relationships that you can build up with stakeholders that are influential in your industry to perhaps be able to call on them down the road. And, speaking of relationships, Garvin, you and I met a number of years ago, and, we've been talking more recently. And again, thank you for sharing the book, and that it's been enlightening to be able to dig into some of these topics with you. So thank you. And I'm going to ask you the question that I ask everybody at the end of every podcast that I do, which is, what is one thing that people wouldn't expect to know about you? And I will expect to learn something out of this myself as well.
I'll try and see if I can learn too, because that is the thing we should all learn every day, right? That's my motto. I said at the start, I'm a country boy. I actually came from Monaghan, a little village, but we lived next door to Patrick Kavanagh, so one of Ireland's great poets, as you'll know. We were next door neighbours, right? And and it was intriguing to watch them. They were vibrant, cavalier. I mean, they in a very dull, like 1970s Ireland. They would waltz up the road in full party dress at 8 a.m. to collect the milk churns. They just did mad. There was really interesting behaviors. And I watched this and I learned, and I think I tried to absorb the power of being liberal and throwing off the taboos and the handcuffs of the world. So in Monaghan, of all places, through observation to learn of the freedom and the liberation of, letting the hair down. So I ended up, I wrote poetry, I sold paintings in bands, all those kind of things when I was a teenager, before corporate life kind of squeezed all that back out of me.
Yeah.
Pete. So I'm hoping to return to the arts in my later years. I hope that's not anytime too soon, but I try and hold it dear, and the importance of storytelling and the importance of visualization in the world for me to unlock opportunity and unlock awareness, I think is super critical. So I don't know if that answers the question, but maybe that gives you an insight.
Well, I think you're heading back in that direction, Garvin, definitely being out in the wild like this. And as we said at the beginning, be the change that you seek. And it sounds like you're doing that. So
trying. Pete, lovely being with you. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Garvin. Great chat. That does it for this week, folks. Thanks to Garvin Callan for opening up his mind to help us figure out why he does what he does. For show notes and resources, check out our website, moneyneversleeps.ie. If you like what you heard, please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, as it helps others to find the show. Also, thanks to Conan Brophy from Create Sound for mixing and editing this episode. Conan is an excellent media man to get in touch with when you're thinking about launching your own podcast. As for me, I'm an early-stage startup investor focused on where fintech meets crypto and crypto meets Web3, and I lead the Techstars Web3 Accelerator. Applications are now open for our spring 2025 class, so check us out on techstars.com/accelerators/web3 to apply. There are plenty of links in the show notes on moneyneversleeps.ie on how to get in touch, so don't hesitate to reach out. Finally, till next time, thanks for listening. See ya!